Joining me live now from Melbourne is the Home Affairs Minister, Clare O'Neil. Clare O'Neil, thanks so much for your time. Let me start with where we're at in terms of these high-risk detainees deemed that have to be released. Any others you intend to release this week or month? And we keep hearing this figure that another 340 might have to be released. Is that correct? And what have they done?
Good morning, Andrew, and it's really great to be with you and your viewers. The Australian Government was ordered by the High Court of Australia last Wednesday to release a cohort of people who have been held in immigration detention. The decision of the High Court was very significant. It overturned a 20-year legal precedent which has governed how the Commonwealth deals with immigration detention. The immediate implications of that decision are that 93 people have been removed from immigration detention. The 340 figure that you quote there is a number that includes the 90 people. So the considerations need to be made now when we receive the reasons for decision from the High Court about if any additional people from that cohort will need to be released. The 340 number is a group of people who have been in immigration detention for longer than a year. It is very unlikely that the High Court's ruling will apply to all of them.
How many of them is your advice that it will apply to?
Well, if I can just help you understand this, Andrew, we have a decision from the High Court of Australia which has overturned 20 years of legal precedent. What the High Court has done is something which is a little bit unusual, and that is that it has made a decision. It has not explained the reasons for the decision. So what we know is that the people who are in the exact description of the complainant in the High Court matter have been released from immigration detention, but the High Court will clarify exactly why it made its decision early next year. And Andrew, if I can just explain a little bit further about what this decision means, it is a very important decision for the Australian Government. What it tells us is that the High Court believes that the Australian Government, in detaining people in this way, has effectively taken on what is a punitive role and the role of the judiciary. Now, you and your viewers would understand that we have a legal system that's set up along the lines of the separation of powers. The courts can do some things. As a politician, I'm not allowed to set the law and be judge and jury. So the High Court has delineated a new line for the Australian Parliament. It would have applied if the decision had been made while Peter Dutton was the Home Affairs Minister. The job for the Australian Government now, and my job, is to make sure that I follow the law, I implement the High Court's rulings, and I do so in a way that keeps the community safe.
But Minister, Peter Dutton wants you to legislate to re-detain these, what he calls hardcore criminals. Have you had advice that's not possible?
Absolutely, it is not possible, and I know that Peter Dutton knows that. What we have here is a full court High Court decision that tells us that the Australian Government cannot detain people on the basis that was occurring before. That is the absolute decision of the High Court. It's not some third-order interpretation.
I understand,
and it's incumbent on me as a minister, like anyone else, to follow the law. Now, this is a full court High Court constitutional decision, which is telling us that the Australian Government does not have the power to do the thing that Peter Dutton is saying should be done. So let me make a couple of things clear. The first is, if it were up to me, all of these people would still be in detention. That is why they were continuing to be detained when the High Court made its call. Some of these people have done deplorable, disgusting things, and I do not want these people in our country. However, I must follow the law, as must Peter Dutton. The second thing I would just say is that anyone with a basic understanding of the legal system in this country would know that what Peter Dutton has been running around the Parliament this week saying the government should do is utterly impossible for us to do. What I would ask people to do in this case is be constructive.
But Minister, you say you can't re-detain them, but you can put ankle bracelets on them. You can threaten them with mandatory minimum sentences. That's as far as you can go. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's abundantly clear from the High Court's decision that I can't detain these people. And I can tell you very directly, person to person, if I had the legal power to detain any of these people, they would still be in detention. That is why Andrew Giles and I had kept them in detention up until that point.
All right.
Now, what we are working through at the moment is a scheme that will help us keep the community safe within the legal limits of the Commonwealth, and that is the bill that has been agreed to by the Parliament this week. I want you to understand that what the Australian government has done, a very significant response in a week and a half since the High Court overturned 20 years of precedent, is phase one of the government's activities. The scheme that has been set up will need some refinement. I think the opposition understands that and the government understands that. When the reasons for decision are handed down at the beginning of next year, we will then be able to look at what else we can do about this. But that is the situation that we're in. We've put in place a scheme that is the best way for us to protect community safety within the limits of what the High Court has laid out.
Peter Dutton calls the 80 or 90 that have been let out hardcore criminals. Are they all hardcore criminals? And are the remainder of the 340 who may be released all, or are a lot of them hardcore criminals? Are they murderers? Are they pedophiles, etc.?
Let me say again, these people are not people who I wanted on the streets of our country. And that is exactly why they were kept in detention until our government received a High Court ruling that we must follow, that we must release these people from immigration detention. So let's just be really clear about this. Some of the crimes that have been committed by these people are deplorable and disgusting. And that is why they were being detained by me and our government.
Including by the other 250.
Up until the point that the High Court told us this was illegal.
Including by the other 250.
Who are in detention, the additional people who are in detention because the Australian government, my view and Minister Giles's view, is that we do not want these people on the streets. Now, we went through a long process where we, the Australian government, argued to the High Court that we didn't want these people released. At the end of the day, the High Court has made a ruling, and every government minister and every person in the Parliament, whether it's Peter Dutton, whether it's me, whether it's anyone else having their say on this, knows that at the end of the day, we have to follow the law. The High Court has ordered the government to release these people, and I hope that we're not having an argument here about whether the government must follow the law. It's a pretty fundamental feature of our legal system.
Minister, you tweeted the following after you introduced the government's initial legislation on Thursday. Peter Dutton loves to talk about what a tough guy he is on our borders. The truth is, words don't make Australia safe. Tough laws do. He called you bluff, didn't he? Because he made the laws tougher. He made the government make the laws tougher.
Andrew, what you saw is the Parliament working through a difficult issue this week, and the government leading a process where a little over a week after a major High Court decision, we constructed a new legislative regime to manage some of the implications of that. What you saw was a government that brought forward a package of measures that the opposition made amendments to. This is the Parliament working together, and it is absolutely unremarkable that it's doing so. What often happens in our Parliament is the government produces a law, the opposition or other parties make amendments, and ultimately we negotiate and agree. This is how most things become law in our country. It's unremarkable, and I think the Parliament moves swiftly, and I was pleased to see it occur.
You must admit with that statement you led with your chin a bit, didn't you?
Well, I don't agree. We produced a law at the beginning of that day of the parliamentary sitting, and at that stage it was unclear whether the opposition was going to support us to move quickly to introduce and pass the law. The opposition did work with us on that, and I'm grateful for the cooperation and support. What we see now is that we are going to have to make refinements to that law, and that's something that we'll be working with the opposition on. My job is to make sure that I implement the High Court decision, and I do so in a way that protects the Australian community, and that's what you saw the government do this week.
It seemed clear from the comments of High Court Judge Jacqueline Gleeson in June there was a distinct chance you'd lose this right. Why weren't you ready for it? Why didn't the government have a legislative option to deal with this ready to go? And why wasn't a legislative option put to Cabinet on the Monday after last week? Why were you caught so flat-footed on it?
Well, I vehemently disagree with your assessment of the situation, Andrew. What we had just over a week ago was the High Court overturned 20 years of precedent that Australian governments have relied on to manage people in immigration detention. And we're just a week on from that very substantial High Court decision, and you've got 93 people in the community who are on bespoke visa conditions. You've got an ABF and Australian Federal Police joint operation, Operation Aegis, which is case managing these people in the community, and you have a completely new legislative regime which helps us implement the High Court decision and manage community safety. I have been in Parliament for 10 years, Andrew. I have never seen an Australian government move so quickly to manage the fallout of a major constitutional decision.
You knew this could happen in June, though, didn't you, or did you?
We knew that there was a High Court action on foot. We knew that it was 20 years of legal precedent, and we were advised that it was likely that the Commonwealth would win the case, that is, allow us to do what we wanted to do, which is keep these people in detention. But of course, of a High Court decision of this size and importance, we had properly prepared for the decision. And that is why a week and 1 day after the decision, after a major High Court decision, we had put in place all of the things I've referred to there.
Minister, who advised you were likely to win, and how recently did you receive that advice?
Well, we received that advice from the Department of Home Affairs, who tell us what chances we have of success and failure in each legal case. But I do need you to understand that
when did you receive that advice?
I do need you to understand that our department is one of the most litigated against departments of the Commonwealth. There are literally thousands of cases on foot at all times. We operate in an area which is full of legal and operational risk. My job is complex, and it's an important part of my job to manage that complexity. What you saw here was an Australian government ready for a High Court decision, and that is why just over a week over the decision was made, we have put in place supports and protections for Australians to manage what is a very difficult situation.
Did you receive that advice from Michael Pezzullo, your suspended head of Department of Home Affairs?
Look, I'm not going to get into who specifically, which individuals give me advice about any of this, Andrew. I can just tell you that most people looking at this case would have assumed that the Commonwealth was going to win the case because it was 20 years of precedent, and it is
Minister,
quite
I understand,
unusual for the High Court.
but I just want to get to this.
It is quite unusual for the High Court to do what it did, but I just need you to understand, Andrew, that the Commonwealth was preparing for the eventuality that did occur, and that is why so much preparatory work was done, and that is why a week and a half on from this, we've managed to put in place so much by way of community protections. Now, I say again, I've been in Parliament for 10 years. I've never seen the Commonwealth government move at this speed.
All right. Minister, early last week, you weren't even talking about legislation. Wasn't it the opposition's pressure that got you to put in the ankle bracelets?
No, that's absolutely incorrect.
So you always intended to tighten up this legislation because you and Andrew Giles were in the Parliament saying they've been released under these strict visa conditions.
So we always intended to tighten up the legislation. Absolutely, that is absolutely the case.
Let me just ask you this.
What we couldn't do, Andrew, was the opposition went through a period of a number of days this week, roaming around the Parliament, telling people we should pass legislation to overturn a full court decision of the High Court about the meaning of the Australian Constitution, which they know and I know was utterly impossible. What we knew we could do after the High Court decision was make changes to provide better community protections, and that's exactly what the Parliament has done in record pace.
Did the Department of Home Affairs during June or after June still recommend to you that it was likely the government or expected that the government was going to win this case?
Look, Andrew, I'm not going to get into more detail about what I've been advised. I can just tell you that it is unusual for the High Court to do what it has done, and that is overturn 20 years of legal precedent. Now, the decision the High Court made is not something that can be interpreted every which way. It is very clear. The full court of the High Court has overturned a decision that was made in 2004, which has governed the use of immigration detention by the Commonwealth. They did overturn that decision last Wednesday. Now, my job is to manage the impact of that decision to protect the community within the legal confines that have been set up by the High Court of Australia, and that is exactly what Minister Giles and I are doing.
As you know, one of these cases involves someone who raped a 10-year-old boy, and there was an individual who killed a pregnant woman and then blew her up. Are you disappointed at the High Court? Do you have any criticism at the High Court in relation to this?
It's not appropriate for ministers of the government to criticise the High Court, and I'm not going to do that. What I can tell you is that the Commonwealth argued vehemently that the decision not be made. We wanted to keep these people in detention because I do not want people like this walking the streets of our country. I can tell you I've got 3 young children. One of the reasons I got into politics is because I want to be able to protect and make safe the community that my children grow up in. And it is not in their interest that this unfold in the way that it has. However, the High Court of Australia determines the meaning of the Australian Constitution. And a week ago, they made a decision which overturned 20 years of legal precedent, and that has led us to where we are today. Now, I operate in an area where there is significant risk to a lot of the work that I oversee. Losing court cases like this is one of them. That is why we properly prepared for this eventuality, why we were able to roll out so many different protections for the Australian community up until this date. But I'd say to you again, this is not over. This decision is so significant, it does need the Commonwealth to rethink the management of immigration detention, and we will work through that. We will be in a better position to do so when the High Court releases the reasons for its decision, and it will do that early next year.
Minister, we're nearly out of time, but just briefly, what can we expect from your cybersecurity strategy, which I expect to be released this week? And is it a blow that your cybersecurity coordinator, Darren Goldie, has had to be stood down over an HR complaint just when you're on the verge of releasing the strategy?
Well, this is a really big and exciting week for those who watch the cybersecurity policy area. Cybersecurity is one of the most significant national security risks that we face. It is the fastest growing crime type in our country, and it's something that affects the lives of every single person in our great country. When we arrived in government, we were well behind on this matter. We've done a lot of work in 18 months to help us bring us back to where the rest of the world is on this. The cyber strategy that will be released next week is really about looking at all of the things that need to be done over the forthcoming 2 years to keep us right at the threshold we need to be at. So it will be very comprehensive. It will help us think about how we better protect Australians from cyber risk, and it will also address this really important issue of resilience. No matter what we do as a government,
Darren Goldie's absence, is that a blow?
We can't reduce cyber risk to zero, so a big part of our strategy is about building resilience and making sure we can manage these incidents. You asked about Darren Goldie. This is a matter for the Department of Defence. There's been a workplace complaint, as you foreshadowed there, and he's been recalled to the department. What is most important about this is that the position of National Cybersecurity Coordinator actually exists. And you saw the need for that, I think, in the DP World incident that's unfolded over the last fortnight or so. For the first time, really, the Australian government was able to put someone in charge of the incident, delegate them to manage the consequences of that incident, and the cyber coordinator was pivotal to making sure that there weren't repercussions for the rest of the community. We've got a very good person standing in.
Just finally and briefly, what's your reaction to this incident involving the Chinese ship and the Australian naval divers, and why weren't we told about it earlier?
I'm very disappointed to see what happened here, and it is absolutely unacceptable what has occurred. The safety of Australian military personnel is paramount to the Australian government, and what occurred here is something that we don't want to see continued. This incident occurred on Tuesday last week, and the Australian government has made its views known to the Chinese government through the appropriate channels.
Home Affairs Minister Clare O'Neil, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thanks, Andrew.